Welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Dylan Tomine. He's the author of a new book that's coming out, Headwaters, coming out in April of 2022. The reason I wanted to have you on, Dylan, is you are the author of Closer to the Ground, a book that's about living and foraging in Washington area. And I just happened upon the book, and I really wanted to have you on. So thanks for agreeing to take some time out of your day to talk with me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This is awesome. Thank you.
So it ended up being pretty fortuitous. So we can both kind of recap this older book and then preview the new one. Closer to the Ground, you gave a look of a year through the seasons of your family fishing and foraging in Washington. And I really liked it and appreciated it because it sounds a lot like a lifestyle in southern Southeast Alaska. So a Ketchikan resident would think, oh yeah, going out there for trolling for salmon and then berry picking and everything. Why did you decide to write the book?
Well, first of all, I will say, yeah, there's huge similarities between where we live in Puget Sound and where you are. It's just the main difference is, the thing I call the northward time machine is that, you're the abundance of salmon and shrimp and shellfish and all that stuff. Where you are is infinitely more abundance than what we have here, and it's probably more like what it was like here maybe 50 or 75 years ago. So we have kind of the austere version of what you experience. And if most of your listeners are in Southeast, I think hopefully you, if you're listening, feel really lucky to be where you are, because things are in a pretty depleted state here comparatively. That said, there's plenty of fun things to do outside, and it seemed like it was a fun way to spend time together as a family. And somehow when you add food into the equation, whether it's berry picking or mushrooms or spot prawns or crab or whatever, like the enthusiasm from the kids seems to rise. Like, if they can go find something and bring it home and cook it and kind of be the heroes of the dinner, that makes it all the better. And thankfully, a lot of those edible objects that we forage or fish or hunt for are delicacies. They're the best food in the world. If you talk about fresh Dungeness crab or spring Chinook, or I don't know that there's anything most people would rather eat than those things. So
right.
But to get to your question, I wrote the book really because I'm so bad with remembering to shoot videos. And I'm always jealous. I see people's home movies or video clips that they made of their family doing stuff, and they're kind of these nostalgic fun things. And I realized that I would go do these things with the kids and I'd forget to record any of it or take pictures or anything like that. And so it was kind of just a verbal home movie. I wanted to just write down what we were doing and thinking and feeling and experiencing on these, they're mostly kind of small adventures close to home sort of outings.
Yeah. We talked off air briefly about just how bizarre it was during COVID. So obviously you wrote the book well before COVID, but how did those or that lifestyle help you get through COVID? And I'm sure your son, who was a high school freshman this year, having that sort of lifestyle already instilled and that sort of appreciation for getting outside and being self-sufficient, how did that help the family through COVID?
I think one of the real silver linings of the lockdown and the whole pandemic in general is that I, as a father, was able to spend a lot more time with teenage kids than is normal. The restriction on the kids' freedom and ability to even go to school or play sports really cleared up the schedule for us to be, if you read Closer to the Ground, my daughter was 7 in that book and my son was 7 and 4. And now they're teenagers. And so I think what I saw as they grew older is it just became harder and harder to schedule doing these small adventures close to home. Both my kids are lucky enough to be involved with travel level sports. And so that's an awful lot of practices and tournaments and road times. And then between that and school and any other activities they're doing, plus, my work schedule, it was increasingly difficult to find time that coincided to go do these. We're still able to do it, but it was just compressed into shorter time spans. And so when the lockdown started in March of 2020, it sort of upended all of that scheduling. And, it became not even foraging. And so just being able to have the time to go for walks on the beach with the kids was something that I really, I think I'll look back and really savor that as a special time. Now, I don't think that was the kids' first choice,
Right.
As teenagers to be spending that much time with, excuse me, with their old man. But I really value it. And I think at some point they'll look back too and be able to say, this was kind of a special time. We had to hunker down together. And the fact that we know how to fish or go crabbing or dig clams or pick oysters or any of those things made it easier for us to have kind of shared goals, like, hey, let's go, even if it was something small, like let's go see if there's any chanterelles in the woods right now, or let's just go pick some oysters and cook them up for dinner. I think those were really helpful, valuable pieces of sort of surviving through. Excuse me.
Yeah. You mentioned in the book about shifting baselines, and not that we're lowering standards, but maybe we are, because we didn't really get to experience when things were unbelievable. And by comparison, of course, southern Southeast Alaska is 100 years, 75 years, 50 years still behind Puget Sound area. But with the increasing benefits of the outdoors and more people maybe going outside, are you happy that it can bring value to people's life, but also worried about the increased pressure and attention and how that use plays out on some of these wild areas?
Yeah, I think, you couldn't be an outdoors person and not be concerned with, I think when you look at just the industries around it, for 2 years, it's been really hard to find a kayak or find a fly rod or a bicycle, or, people were really forced into a more outdoor lifestyle, which I think in the big picture, I consider that a benefit, because I think the more time you spend outside, specifically around hunting, fishing, and foraging, the awareness of some of the bigger environmental issues, you can see better how dire it is and how, just important, I think, the engagement on those issues is. And, in the big picture, I think, climate change is impacting everybody now. And we're seeing it here with ocean survival for salmon. We're seeing it with, much hotter summertime temperatures. We had 110 degrees on my porch here last summer, which is, mind blowing. And then we're seeing it also in really amplified winter storms, which scour out the gravel for salmon spawning. And, and so I think in the real large picture of it, if you look at it and think, okay, more people outside maybe is inconvenient to me, or maybe is a hindrance in some ways. I think the fact is we need as many people as possible to help address the larger environmental issues. Mm-hmm. Now, so I say that, and there's a caveat, right? Like the other thing is that we also have to be careful about limited resources, right? Like if every single person, for example, over the last 2 years with all the people going outside to do these things, it's been harder and harder to find untouched mushroom picking, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's, on the little island I live on, there's 3 or 4 pieces of public woods that are big enough to support, really pretty robust chanterelle picking opportunity in the fall, but they're getting picked like crazy, now. Right. And so, I think there's certainly issues around what the resources can withstand. If everybody goes out and, kills as many crab as they can or kills as many salmon as they can, certainly that has an impact. So I think there's pluses and minuses to that. And some of it is going to require some level of regulation, because people left to their own devices will take everything possible, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But in the big picture, I think hopefully we're converting more people that are willing to vote for politicians that are talking about things like climate change and dam removal and some of the larger environmental issues that we really need to address.
Yeah, and I think there's if you do believe in a level of climate change, that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that you're far left, crazy, whatever. There's definitely a good conversation that is being, or a conversation between people who are user groups and say, hey, we got to figure something out here. In your previous NV chapter, you talk about, or you wrote, quote, I would like to drive a hybrid, live in a house built from recycled materials, eat only organic, sustainable food, and act as a responsible steward for our planet. But as I'm finding, unless you have pretty deep pockets and plenty of time in your hands, it's a lot easier said than done. I do think there's a lot of people who think that people who are conscious or who want to be good stewards are seen as like greenies, or seen as ridiculous people who just don't understand the reality. But it is that sort of, you're confronted with the reality of, I want to be a good steward, but I also look at my carbon footprint. How do you think we go forward with this, like on an individual level? Like, how can we keep this contradiction, or how can we keep ourselves from going crazy with our footprint, and yet trying to use these things and have value in our lives?
Well, my life, like I think most people's lives, is filled with those contradictions, exactly what you're talking about, and it's tough. I think some of the argument you make around, regular people looking at people who are driving a Prius, and a lot of that is performative, or, it's virtue signaling, right? Like, hey, look, I think about how, when the first hybrid cars came out, Honda figured, well, people just want regular cars that don't burn as much gas. So we're going to put our hybrid in the body of a regular Honda Civic, and people will buy it. And Toyota said, no, people really want other people to know that they're driving a responsible car. So we're going to put ours in a really weird looking car called the Prius. And when you drive that, people will know that you're concerned with the environment. Never mind the impact of disposing of those batteries and the cost of manufacturing a new car. But Toyota won that battle, very clearly. And so I think there is a lot of virtue signaling going on. But I also think the fact is that almost everyone who's a fisherman or a hunter or a forager wants to do better, wants to be better, and wants to do what they can to preserve the resource that they love, at least for their kids and their kids' kids.
Right.
And so that contradiction is tough. I mean, in reality, I've been following some of the new findings from the commission in Washington that just released that said, hey, small individual actions do make a difference, and I believe that. I think we can do the best we can, but our current world and model of how we exist isn't really set up to make that easy. It's expensive. And it's time consuming. You get plastic bags and it says recyclable at specific locations. Well, where I live, that means saving plastic bags for a month and then driving like 80 miles to the one facility that'll take it.
Right.
Which creates this carbon footprint of having driven your car for round trip of 160 miles. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think, for a lot of us, I think the leadership, it's pretty clear that there isn't a lot of political will to make whole-scale policy changes around climate. Like, it's just, it's been an uphill battle. Scientists have been telling us this is a problem for decades now. And, the amount of traction that it gets is kind of marginal at best. But I think the individual actions that we have the power in is more around corporations in where we choose to buy our products, who we buy from, and that corporate policy can have a really big impact if the corporations, the manufacturers of whatever it is you're buying, but especially outdoor equipment, are conscious of their impact and are taking steps to mitigate the impact of their products. And so I think that's one place where us choosing to buy, if you were going to buy some certain product from one company or the other company, maybe it costs a little bit more to buy it from the company that is doing a good job of that kind of stewardship that you're talking about. I think that's a place where individual choice can have a much bigger sort of collective impact. So hopefully that, and hopefully, as you mentioned earlier, as more and more people are going outside to do these activities, that it will lead to more political will sort of at the policy level to start enacting things that, on a large scale can make the change we need to make. I don't really know if it will happen in time, but, I think that's where the hope lies. So I would say individuals as voters and as customers of manufacturing companies have quite a bit of power. And certainly the more of us that are pushing for those things, the better.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a good social norming based on opportunities that are there. You're seeing people, entrepreneurs who are getting into kelp farming and oyster farming and a lot of these sustainable things and hydroponic farming. And so it's not just people who are, just virtual signaling. Like people, entrepreneurs are looking at different alternatives and the healthy alternatives that benefit us. It's nice to be able to go down to the hydroponic farm and get really fresh, good, healthy greens. So you're improving your life as a primary goal, and then as a secondary thing, you're also helping out with reducing the footprint. And then you're looking at like Ford is coming out with their electric truck, and that was one of the main things that I was criticizing the Prius. Like, well, I wouldn't want a Prius because it's not 4-wheel drive. It can't get me to where I want to go. It has no power. But now you're looking at the F-150 with the batteries and the opportunity in some areas where the battery would even be able to power your house. I mean, that would be an amazing thing. I don't really think it's going to work in Ketchikan, but I'd like to see a couple electric trucks work up here first and deal with the rain and the salt water and everything like that. But we're seeing some great opportunities for us to just make good decisions and help us.
And those companies wouldn't be making them if there wasn't consumer demand. Right. And so that's what I think I was trying to get at earlier, that I think you've illustrated actually with more clarity, is just that companies fail if they make stuff nobody's going to buy. Right. Like they can't, like they're reactive. They have to react to what their customer wants. And if the customer is demanding an electric F-150, they're going to make an electric F-150, and I saw somewhere that the orders for that truck are off the charts, Right. And you have Rivian, I think, is making this electric truck, and looks kind of ridiculous to me personally, but I think there are places where our voices are being heard, and that's probably the best way we can make that difference. And I, like you, I'm real interested to see how the electric trucks pan out, and maybe that's something we look at for I'm driving a 2007 4Runner right now that feels real new to me, but yeah, it does not get very good gas mileage, and it's one of those things too where I looked at that and tried to figure out the math around, like, is it a net win for the environment if I just junk that car and buy a brand new something that's more environmentally friendly? With the amount that I drive, probably not. I think I think that's, by the time you look at the footprint of manufacturing and all the raw products that go into it, and probably I would sell my car to somebody else who would drive it around even more than I do. Plus I will have created this whole other car that I've bought. So everything's full of contradictions. I wish there was an easier answer. I don't know what it is. I've thought about it a lot, and just, I think the big shift that really makes a difference is that people think about these things and they're trying to do the best they can do. And maybe it doesn't look good if you're still driving a Chevy Suburban around, but maybe you thought about it and did the math, and it's actually better than buying a new Prius. So I think just being conscious of those things, I think is really is a beneficial thing to our future.
Yeah. The people who are listening for one word or one phrase to decide whether or not someone is on their team or not is just not at all helpful. But yeah, going forward, hopefully we can have conversations, understand the contradictions and make things better.
Yeah, certainly the state of polarization, political polarization we're in today is not helping, right? Like that's just not, it's not going to fly. Like if we're going to actually save ourselves from ourselves, we need to at least find some common ground around preservation of the planet.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of common ground, you're a big fan of fly fishing, as am I. So this new book, you talk about some really interesting fly fishing adventures. Am I hearing that? Can you give me a little preview of this Headwaters book you got coming out?
Yeah, it's I'm really excited about it because I think of fishermen as my people, and so it in a lot of ways it's kind of just my tribute to all the people along the way that have helped me become a better fisherman. It's a mix of collected, previously published stories and new stories and essays, and they're arranged chronologically so that hopefully the idea is as you read through it, you can get an idea of one person's kind of arc of consciousness or changing in how they think about what they're doing. So it starts out with very kind of straight adventure, travel, fishing stories to a lot of exotic places, and progresses through fatherhood, fishing with kids, some conservation writing around wild fish and wild places, and then there's still fishing trips and adventures sprinkled all through. And then you can see that at least this person, me, that the value of those things of going fishing changed from earlier on of just wanting to catch as many and the biggest fish as possible to a deeper appreciation, I think, of the people who I'm going fishing with, my kids, the state of, I'm a steelhead fisherman, born and bred, and the state of steelhead in Washington right now is pretty much on the brink of extinction, and we're in a catastrophic decline right now. And so some of that concern is reflected. And then I think, there's some hope for the future around the generations of fishermen that are coming up that are, these are people who are, the young kids that are maybe just getting to voting age now are far more concerned around conservation and awareness of the resource than I ever was. And so I think it kind of wraps up with some hope for the future.
Cool. Yeah, it's funny, the contradiction, we talked about contradictions. There's another one. If you're, a steelhead fisherman, then you have this respect for this fish, and the goal is to catch the fish and to release the fish. And people would say that, well, why are you not even keeping it, and why are you risking the catching of the fish? But it's steelhead fishermen that put the time and the money and the effort into conservation. In the same way, a lot of times it's the hunters that put forth the money and effort into conservation. So it's those user groups that do more than just talk about it. But it is, when people ask me, like, why do you want to catch a fish that you're going to release? I've done it, and I can't say no to it. It's just such a great experience.
Yeah, it's certainly a contradictory situation, and I write about it some in the book as well. I think I never really thought about it that much. I think that was just what we did. It was sort of catch and release, and in my lifetime, that went from kind of this conservation fringe thing to becoming just what everybody did, is catch and release. And I think, part of it is just from a management standpoint, most of these fisheries can't sustain everybody taking fish home to eat. Like, it's just not possible. But, I had a conversation with a Native American friend of mine, And, that the indigenous point of view really in a lot of, for a lot of the tribes is that, it's highly unethical or sinful even to recreate at the expense of another living creature that you're not going to eat or use for your own sustenance, And so in a number of these communities, there's a very clear sort of philosophical rejection of catch and release fishing. And so and I see that, like, I understand that. And, in a better world, I think it would be a catch and kill fishery for the most part. But with the numbers of people, like, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, there aren't enough fish, And so this is something I struggle with for sure, around morality, ethics, my desire to eat fish. I mean, we're a salmon family. We, where it's allowable and the runs can sustain it, we want to be able to take the fish home we eat, that we catch to eat and smoke and freeze and vac seal and that whole 9 yards. But I think there's a lot of contradictions there, and they're not just like legal or even conservation contradictions. They really get to the heart of kind of ethics and morality. Mm-hmm. And I don't, again, maybe this is a worthless podcast, because I don't have advice around that. I don't know what the answer is. I just know it's something that I think about quite a bit, and I don't know, do I still participate in catch and release fishing? Absolutely. But maybe it's not quite as carefree a position as I thought it was at one time.
Yeah. I think some of the scariest people I've ever met are the people who pretend to have all the answers. Those people, how are you that sure of anything, man? That's pretty scary.
Well, I'm not sure of anything, so I guess that's maybe to my benefit. But yeah, it's really, I think what's important is that people think about these things and consider them, and then adjust according to what they feel is right, and do their best. And so, just one little example of that is that we've had extremely low returns of steelhead coast-wide over the last couple of years. I mean, catastrophically low. The Skeena River in northern BC just recorded their lowest return in history, or at least in the 55 years of the Tyee test fishery on the Skeena. Same thing for the snake in Clearwater in the upper Columbia. The Thompson in southern BC is basically, those fish are extinct. And now we're going into the second year of catastrophically low returns on the Olympic Peninsula here. And for the most part, those fisheries have remained open, maybe with reduced seasons, but there has been opportunity to go fish. And I've just chosen not to participate. Mm-hmm. At great heartache to myself. It's been really sad, but I've canceled trips the last 2 years to the Snake tributaries, to the Skeena tributaries, and the Olympic Peninsula. I didn't fish at all this winter. And it's, for somebody who has really, eaten, slept, drank, written, like everything has been around those fish, to not have viable access to them right now is almost having like this identity crisis, like if I can't fish for steelhead or write about it or talk about it or tie flies for it or whatever, like I kind of feel like, who am I? And I say that half jokingly, but there's actually some level of fear when I start to articulate that, and not, I don't necessarily have anything against people that are fishing or guiding during these low return years. I don't think that we're the primary cause of it, or that we're going to be the final nail in the coffin. I just personally, I guess I don't want to be the guy that shoots the last buffalo.
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, even catch and release fly fishing with swung flies for steelhead is probably the lowest success rate and the lowest mortality rate of any fishing period. We've all released fish that took the fly deep enough that it nicked a gill raker and they're bleeding and, they're not going to survive. And with the numbers right now, I feel like if that happened now, I would feel terrible personally. So yeah, it's been, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I mean, ocean conditions have shifted to better starting last spring, the scientists tell me. And, I think we'll see some variability in the runs going forward, that we're sort of due for a few better years, but the overall trend is downward, and that's where that shifting baseline thing comes in. If if you had no fish for 2 years, the big improvement of having a few fish doesn't necessarily mean everything's okay.
Right.
So yeah, it's something that I've been struggling with it a bunch. I have friends who've chosen to fish anyway. I've had friends who've chosen not to fish. I spent part of some days last year on the Olympic Peninsula swinging flies without a hook on it. And I found it, strangely unsatisfying. I wasn't going to kill the fish anyway, but not having the hook, it just wasn't the same thing. So I don't know. It's, I think right now it's sort of a personal decision. And then again, as a group, trying to put pressure on the management agencies and the policymakers to say, hey, we're in a tailspin here. We need drastic change. Like the status quo, the same old is not going to work because look where it's gotten us,
Right.
And we've had basically the same salmon and steelhead management regime for 100 years. And that's been basically a 45-degree angle line downwards if you chart the, the returns of fish. So I'm hoping that some of this really dire circumstance we're in now starts to spur some action around large scale policy change of how we manage these fish.
Mm-hmm. So if steelhead, I was going to ask you if steelhead was your fish of inspiration. It's pretty clear that it is. What about writing influences? Who did you read growing up and who was pretty influential with you in your writing?
Oh man, I love to think and talk about that because there's been so many, but in outdoor writing, to me, there's always just the big three, and you can probably guess who those people are. But I would say, Tom McGuane, Jim Harrison, and Russell Chatham have been by far the most formative. I don't pretend to be able to write like them, but as a reader, those, if you read Russell Chatham's Dark Waters, it's brilliant. If you read Tom McGuane's An Outside Chance or Silent Seasons or The Longest Silence, I take it back. Silent Seasons is Harrison's book. But if you read those books, especially like the McGuane, if you're a writer, it almost makes you feel like not writing anymore because it's so brilliantly done. Do you read any of those guys?
I bought, I think Dark Waters was the first book I bought in two different, you have the book once, why would you buy it again? But I just saw another copy, this looks different. I need to have this one too. And yeah, I'm right there with you. It's very difficult to read that and then think there's no way that I can come close to anything. Why would I even try?
I I I have somewhere here I have written down, and I rewrite this and reread it. Just a single sentence from a story called I think it's called On the Henry's Fork from Tom McGuane. That is like, to me, it's like the single most perfect sentence in the English language, but for sure in fishing literature. And it's daunting. So, and I've had the really great luck and good fortune of Tom McGuane being a good friend and a mentor. He's helped me a lot with my writing, and yeah, I can't say enough about that. I would also add to that Ted Leeson's book, The Habit of Rivers, which is just another brilliantly thought and written fly fishing book. It's a little skinny book. It's only, maybe a half an inch thick, but amazing thinking and writing there as well.
So, like, Tom McGuane wrote the foreword for your book. How did that go down? Did he offer? Did you ask him? That has to be just a crazy feeling to have a guy like that write the foreword to your book.
Yeah, single greatest moment in my publishing career, is when the day he said he would do that. So Tom and I have fished together some, and hung out together, and had lots of conversations around writing and kind of the publishing industry. And he's just been a really good sort of big brother to me in a lot of ways. And when I wrote Closer to the Ground, I had not published a book before and didn't really know anything about how it worked. And so I sent him the manuscript, and I got to tell you, like, McGuane is the most brutal editor ever.
I bet.
It would be like having Michael Jordan trying to coach you as a basketball player. Like, he just can't understand like why I'm so bad, right?
Yeah.
And so I was really nervous, and I sent the manuscript to him, and I was like, oh my God, like, I shouldn't have sent it. Like why did I send it? And I had sent him stuff before, and he'd been pretty critical, with now looking back, with pretty good reason, but so I was scared to death, and I mailed this thing off to him, and he wrote back right away, and he said, this is a really good book. I love it, and he said, if there's anything I can do to help you with the publication of this or whatever, I think it's an important book for people to read. And I was like, oh my God, like, no way. Like, Michael Jordan just said I'm a pretty good basketball player, and so I said, would you write the foreword? And he said he'd love to. And then there was this whole thing is like, oh my God, like, the foreword's going to be so much better than the rest of the book. Like, it's going to make me look bad, but yeah, so that was, what an honor. To have somebody that I like, I love his writing more than I know how to express. So to have him just be a part of that book process was really, really special.
Yeah. I don't know. A lot of authors talk about writing your own story, not trying to be anybody else. Like, read people, get influence, but ultimately you have to be true to yourself. And, that's such it can be a difficult thing, because you think that you max out what you have, and then it's not at all anywhere near anybody else that you admire. But someone says, hey, this is pretty good, or appreciates it. It's a pretty cool feeling. I was a big fan of Patrick McManus and Bill Heavey growing up. So I kind of took that humorous sort of, and my family's outdoor adventures were oftentimes disastrous. We had an inboard on our boat. And so when I grew up in Southeast, I just remember taking naps on the boat because the main would blow, and we have to take the 15-horse kicker, and it would take hours and hours to get back in, and disasters.
What's the McManus book is they shoot canoes, don't they? Isn't that?
Yeah. Yeah, something to that. But yeah, it's just funny. And to have that and just take ownership of where you're at, and you can be really, really honest with the writing. And I've really enjoyed that.
Well, I think there's some of that in the new book too, because I firmly believe that good fishing trips make lousy stories.
Yeah.
And so mostly the ones I write about is when some kind of catastrophe strikes, and and that's where a lot of, I think, the humor comes from. And that's a good point. I think, McManus, for sure, I read a lot as a kid. I think, that book we talked about, Dark Waters, Chatham's book, the first story in that book, the Great Duck Misunderstanding, to me is the single greatest outdoor story ever written. Like, I mean, just period. Like, that story is brilliant. And I think what I learned from Chatham is that the most interesting parts of a hunting or fishing trip is not the hunting and fishing. You know, that book's about gluttony and overeating and being drunk and sex and all these, like, that story is about all these other things peripheral to the shooting of ducks. Mm-hmm. And I think until I read that, I didn't realize, or I hadn't identified that what's interesting to me and to a lot of people is much more the thinking and I'm not quite sure how to put it, but it's not the fishing itself that's so fascinating. It's sort of the other things outside of the fishing or the hunting that becomes more interesting. And so that I've drawn a lot of inspiration from that. You know, and with McGuane being such a beautiful, and Harrison too, being such a beautiful craftsman with the English language. Like, I feel like I'm writing a sentence and I have like the box of Crayola crayons that have 64 colors, and they're kind of broken, and a bunch of them, the point has been worn down below the label, and it's hard to write with them. And, you know, I feel like I struggle to construct these sentences and paragraphs and stories. And then I look at these beautiful, pristine, like crystals of beautiful prose that McGuane and Harrison write. And really, I mean, I guess the other thing I'd want to add about that, I'm kind of gushing because I'm such a fan, but you know, McGuane has this unbelievable ability to make you love reading his writing, even if the subject matter is something you're not interested in. Mm-hmm. You know, like I don't really like horses. In fact, I would say, like, I hate horses. Like, I'm not interested in any way about horses. But his book, Some Horses, is so beautifully written, and that, again, it's not really about the horses. It's about the people and the writer. And, you know, I picked that book up, read it to cover to cover, and I've probably read it 5 times since, just because it's such great storytelling, you know. Mm-hmm.
I teach sports literature, and I often tell the kids, like, it doesn't matter if you don't know anything about sports. These stories are about humans who happen to play sports, and that's an important distinction, because if you just get into, you know, fly fishing, riding, like, how many ways can you describe, you know, what happens when you hook a fish, or it just gets boring, or so I tried the orange and then it worked, and then I caught a fish, and look at me, I'm the man. It just that's not creative. That's not going to resonate.
Yeah, I think, and you know, hopefully that is sinking in with your students, because I do think that that's the key. And I think, you know, even like the more traditional sports writers, you know, like I'm thinking of John Feinstein, who's a great writer, and, you know, his book about the US Open, you know, I don't watch golf tournaments on TV, but the human drama of this one 4-day tournament that happened in New York, whatever, 25 years ago or something now, the drama of what's going on with the human participants is spellbinding. You know, I mean, it's fascinating. And so yeah, I think what you're saying is really true. I think that's great advice to be giving your students, in that, you know, they're not sports stories, they're human stories. They just happen to be taking place in the setting of whatever sport it is.
Yeah. When you're out fishing, do you find yourself kind of thinking about the angle to write while you're out there, or do you have to kind of push that aside and then just wait till it's all over? Because I write a weekly column, and so sometimes I'm out there hiking or fishing, and I'm assuming the story is going to go one way, and I'm already kind of writing it in my head, but then it kind of ruins the experience. Are you able to just get through the whole thing first and then think about writing it, or are you constantly kind of pre-writing as you're experiencing?
I have the great good fortune of my writing just being a really expensive hobby. And so, you know, there have been a few times where somebody's offered me a free trip to write about it, to promote it. And those have proven to be kind of unsatisfactory because I know I can't say anything negative about it, which is where 9/10 of the humor would come from.
Right. Yeah.
And I am constantly thinking like, how do I describe this, and making notes and all that sort of stuff. And so I think like my better stories come to me much later sometimes, you know. I mean, there's a story in the new book it's a steelhead love story. It's about going steelhead fishing, and you know, with a person who was my girlfriend at the time, and kind of our history together. And I couldn't write about it for maybe, it was close to 2 years later that I actually felt like, okay, I have enough perspective now that I can actually write that. Like, so for me, I need some removed to write a good story. I need some time to have passed to sort of distill out what the most important pieces of that experience were. I think when I'm fishing, all I'm thinking about is catch fish, catch fish, catch fish. You know, or find fish or whatever it is. And, you know, I have people have said to me before, you know, oh, fishing, that must be so relaxing. And to me, it's like whatever the opposite of relaxing is, that's what fishing is to me. Cause like my brain is just churning, like water level, how much did it rain last night? You know, am I standing in the right spot? Is my fly going at the right speed? Maybe my sink tip's not right. I need a heavier sink tip. Maybe I need a small dark fly instead of a big bright fly. I mean, like my brain's just grinding constantly when I'm fishing. So there really isn't room to think about how I'm going to write the story until, you know, a month or a year or whatever goes by. And then it seems clearer to me.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on an hour here, so don't want to take too much of your time here. Can you give me where any other details about the book coming out, where people can buy it? Can they pre-order it, and a final pitch for that?
Yeah, so the new book is called Headwaters, The Adventures, Obsession, and Evolution of a Fly Fisherman. And it's being published by Patagonia Books. It's the official launch date is April 12th, 2022. So just in about a month or less than a month from when we're recording this. But it's available for pre-order now. I've been told that it really helps the algorithm at some of the large book sales companies that I won't name here, if people pre-order it. So I would love it if people felt the urge to just jump on and pre-order it now. On my website, you can find, my website's just my name, dylantomine.com. But you can also pre-order it and have it signed and inscribed from my local bookstore called Eagle Harbor Books. And then Closer to the Ground, the book about fishing and foraging and hunting and cooking and eating with my kids, is available pretty much anywhere that you would buy books.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I'm going to be touring with the Headwaters with the fishing book quite a bit. No Alaska dates right now, but if you happen to be in or near Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, St. Paul, Bozeman, Boise, Sun Valley, and New York City in the next 3 or 4 months, we have a bunch of event dates coming up. It'll be, once it's all finalized, it'll be posted on my website as well.
Cool. Do you have a social media account following? Are you big into that, or just mostly send people to the website?
No, I'm on Instagram. Just my name, Dylan Tomine. All one word is my Instagram handle. It's a good way to reach me. Is the DMs on Instagram is a good way to find me. I think that's how you and I found each other too, right?
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So that's a good place, and I try my best to respond to everything that comes through. And the fact that we're doing this podcast is proof positive that I do respond.
Yeah.
And mostly I thanks a lot. Like I have a really warm spot in my heart for Southeast Alaska and Western Alaska too. You know, I worked in Bristol Bay for 6 summers. Have spent a little bit of time in Ketchikan and Juneau, and then a lot of time on the northern BC coast as well. So if you look at the paperback version of Closer to the Ground, the photo on the cover was actually taken right across Work Channel from the very southeastest part of Alaska.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say this doesn't look like looking across from Seattle or to Seattle. Didn't look like anywhere in Puget Sound, but I know you did some stuff not exactly right in that area. But yeah, I got the book right here. So.
Oh, there you go. All right, right on. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Dylan. I really appreciate your time. Looking forward to the new book, and I'm glad I'm glad my wife bought this book so I could read it. So
yeah, well, I'm happy you enjoyed it, and yeah, I think it'd be a great fit for people in Southeast that are living closer to the land than most of us do, and also if you haven't had the contact yet, Stephanie can probably send you a copy of the new book if you don't have it yet. There should be hard copies of them relatively soon. So
excellent, really appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, well, take care. I appreciate it, Jeff.
All right, take care. You too. See you.
All right.